Joining us now is our Chief Foreign Editor, Rob Parsons. Rob, what in fact are China's aims in Africa?
Well, China has lots of aims in Africa, but I think the first and foremost is it needs African raw materials and energy to drive its own manufacturing base. The Chinese economy, massive obviously, and developing at an incredible speed. It needs many of the raw materials that only Africa can provide in sufficient numbers at that sort of price. The problem is, and until fairly recently, before the Chinese arrived, getting access to those raw materials was pretty difficult. Mining and transport were two key issues. So the Chinese have invested heavily in those areas, providing massive loans to Africa, and boosting trade by an enormous figure over the last 20 years, so that they can transport the raw materials and energy to the ports along the East African coast and thence to China. That is the main driving issue. Obviously, there are political benefits as well, and military for that matter. If you look at Djibouti, that were up on the Horn of Africa, the Chinese have built a naval facility there, which gives them access right to the far end of the Indian Ocean. And there are enormous trading opportunities that are created by this sort of investment in the African economy as well.
Now, China is calling the relationship a win-win, but others are far less charitable. There are fears that many African countries are falling into a debt trap. And the former US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, last year accused China of predatory loan practices. Where, in fact, does the truth lie? Well,
as with everything, probably somewhere in between the two. The Chinese are conscious of the accusation. It was interesting, Xi Jinping at this enormous summit in Beijing addressed that point. Said China's not interested in vanity projects and put forward another 60 billion for investment of loans and credit to Africa. But it doesn't completely brush away the accusation. And there's no doubt that there is a growing feeling that perhaps Rex Tillerson put it too strong with his predatory loan practices accusation, but there's no doubt that many poor African countries are being lured into debt relationships with China, which it's extremely unlikely they're ever going to be able to honour. So what happens then? Do they have to sell off their assets to the Chinese? And that, of course, is going to be a lurking suspicion. There is a fear or a feeling. I mean, I've just come back from Ethiopia myself. Anti-Chinese feeling, I have to say, is very, very strong, despite the fact that there's massive investment from China in the Ethiopian economy. Ethiopia now has a railway built by the Chinese going from Addis Ababa to the coast in Djibouti. Enormously important for the Ethiopian economy. But that's not how ordinary Ethiopians perceive the Chinese. They feel that the Chinese are coming there, bringing their own people in. It's not giving jobs to the Ethiopians. They're flooding the Ethiopian market with cheap Chinese goods and squeezing out local manufacture. And the quality of the goods is no good. Plus, there is an element there of racism. So the perception of Chinese is not particularly good in many parts of Africa. But there's no doubt that without that Chinese investment, African infrastructure will be nowhere near where it is today.